We are live. Welcome, everybody. This is Francesca Warren with the Educators Room. I am here tonight with Dr. Felicia Rutledge, and we are talking about trends in special education. Before we start, everybody, if we can have you, you will hop on in just a second. If you can go ahead and you can leave where you are calling from. Um, and Dr. Rutledge, can you tell us a little bit about your background? First, introduce yourself. Like, let's start there. Like, introduce yourself and tell us about all the things that are Dr. Rutledge and what we need to know.
So how would I introduce myself? Well, let me see. I'm gonna start like this. I come from a long line of women who are storytellers in their own right. Their words ebb and flow. I learned reflections and community amongst them. My great grandfather was double amputee. My grandmother, well, my grandmother, you see, was late in death. And my nephew is deaf. So I came into the world of special education as a youth. See, I had been around the disability community for as long as I could remember. There was a ramp on the house. There was Kel's captions on the TV. There was the epitome of designing an environment for the needs of those who existed within it. And so that's how I came to be. See, I'm from a long line of storytellers and many firsts. My great grandmother was her indigenous roots. My grandmother, who was the first Black woman to work in the steel factory from Buffalo, New York. So I grew up in Buffalo public school system, you see. And there I flourished through words and ebbs and flows. And I still remain who I am today, Felicia. Felicia Rutledge, she, her, doctor. Yeah, that's me. The first PhD in my family. That's me. Um, as I said, like I came into this space literally as a youth, not really knowing it was a space that existed, right? And so I initially worked as a floating paraprofessional um, for an organization called United Cerebral Palsy at the time. And then I transitioned into working in group homes with individuals with disabilities and transitioned into being a teacher of the deaf. So I've had a range of experience. I was a teacher of the deaf blind and then a teacher of the deaf. I've taught everything from preschool to high school, as well as working in the residential facility back east. So that's kind of like the becoming of me in that space. And I'm also a mom, right? And so being a mom lends its own lens to being in education. And I've been in the field, wow, if you could believe it, over 20 years. Over 20 years.
So it's so interesting, and this is a little bit off topic, but you're from Buffalo. And it's important for us today to note that this is the anniversary of the untimely passing of the Emmanuel Non. And so just holding a little space for them is very important. So we're going to take a pause for a second and just leave some space. Guys, continue to leave your comments. I see them. I'm going to start posting them. Um, and so let's just leave about 30 seconds. Okay, as we come back and you're talking about, I really, when I heard you speak about just your time with a population of people who have many times been forgotten, whether it's in our schools, whether it's in our society, I really wanted to have a conversation about trends in special education after COVID and how we rethink the supports, mainly because there's a lot of talk that's happening, there's a lot of research that's happening about post COVID what education is like. And we talked about this when we hopped on a little bit before this about how this isn't really anything new after COVID. So I want us to like can you talk to us about in your well, hold on, pause. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm gonna pause right there. Tell us a little bit of your background in special education. Like we know the empathy side of it. We know like that you have family members and but what is your experience after being a paraprofessional or during being a paraprofessional working with special needs populations?
So I worked as a floater paraprofessional within a special school. So I have the experience of being in a quote unquote segregated community, right? Where everyone is engaging in the work of supporting learners with disabilities who are not in the public school system per se. After moving out of the paraprofessional space, I became a teacher of the deaf blind for a local high school here in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I worked at the high school in the deaf blind self contained program, which lends itself to a lot of. I had one student. Um, I had one student, and then I had two, and then I had one. They were actually siblings, which was a different dynamic in itself. With a paraprofessional who was a deaf male in that space. So that lended itself to a lot of like collaboration. Where can we ensure that the student is received with his peers and not just with me or the para? And then I transitioned into the K-5 space, elementary, as a teacher of the deaf. And I worked there for a while and then transitioned into a pre-K space, ages 3 through 6, for the remainder of my time in the public school system. After that, I became a um, project facilitator for multi-tiered systems of support. So it was, now let's ensure that we have multi-tiered systems of support that not only support our students with disabilities who are often underserved within our schools, but also those who have invisible disabilities that we don't off they aren't often picked up on the assessments, right? Or they're making academic gains, but we're not also paying attention to, they may have some social emotional concerns that aren't necessarily impeding on the academics. And then I became a regional coordinator for multi-tier systems and supports. And now in my current position, because I stay tied to the space, is I am a director for our special education technology assistance project. Whew, whole mouthful. Where I am now supporting school districts across our state with really honing in on their universal design for learning, accessible education materials, assistive technology in that space, while also supporting as a consultant and coach for special education teachers and inclusive practices. So I have like this wide range of experience as we have this conversation, and also just constantly being in community with adults with disabilities, as well as constantly figuring out spaces for our youth.
So, in a nutshell, guys, she has all the experience. So we're going to dive deep into this. So, COVID, I remember when we went on lockdown, right? And everybody thought, oh, we'll be on lockdown for like a week. And I remember when it was like 2 weeks. And then we were like, oh, we're not going back for the rest of the year. And I remember being concerned about our students and what they were going home to and what they were going to experience and all the things that were happening. We come back from COVID. I know some of the districts in the metro Atlanta area, they went back as soon as August. Other people stayed out for an entire year. And then really in 2022, school got back to normal, whatever that is. And so like let's talk about like what was the reality coming back from COVID for teachers who were trying to meet the needs of students with IEPs, 504s, undiagnosed conditions. And then what was it like for students coming back? So can we talk about that a little bit?
We absolutely can. Let me I say this all the time when I'm having conversations. Some of our students were absolutely elated to be out because of how they were treated, how they were underserved within our school populations, right? A lot of them were excited, like, I get to be at home and like I don't have to be in community with these people who often ignore me, right? Um and right, in saying that, some of them also crave that structure, the structure that we had prior to COVID. You came to school, this was the schedule, this is how the schedule was built, this is when you got your supports, this is what teachers like, that familiarity of school. And that literally was taken away not only from our learners, but also from our teachers. And so when teachers came back and trying to reassess, how do I do school? How do I do education? Knowing that students who are often underserved, there's this gap in skills, right? That like they lost skills, they lost that time to be able to get that high quality instruction, specifically for those students who were in classrooms with teachers who didn't have an easy command of technology, which was a big barrier for a lot of teachers when we were in the pandemic, right? How do I do this, what I would do in person, online? How can I revamp my structure that I had and we were so used to? And so it was a matter of finding, when we entered back, what worked when I was online, what worked when I'm in person, and how can I remix that to really provide optimal support. And for our learners, it was, I just went through this traumatic experience. Is anybody paying attention to it? Our adults in the space were thinking the same thing as well. How do, like, no one's paying attention to this trauma that's just happened? Like, I'm supposed to come back and quote unquote and make this normal? And it wasn't normal for anyone. And us not addressing it further exasperated what was happening. So now, not only am I not thriving academically, mentally, social, emotionally, I'm also placed at a deficit. I'm also in this space of, I don't know what to do with these emotions. So what a lot of us seen when we came back is the increase in behaviors, right? It's like it's the behaviors. When we came back, it was an increase in behaviors. What do I do with this behavior? I don't know what this behavior is. I need help with this. So a lot of people were scrambling, trying to figure out, what do I do for this behavior? What do I do for this? Like, I've never seen this behavior from this student before. And now the student is back and here's this behavior. What do I do with it?
Somebody just said on the Instagram feed, they said, how do I compete with Fortnite? When the kids were at home. And it's so true, because you, as educators, we like to think that everything is perfect. The kids, are their IEPs are written perfectly, they're getting the supports they need, everything is good. But reality, I have a child with a disability, is that many times you have to fight for just an even playing field. And for me, I'm speaking as a parent, not a teacher. Many times it wasn't because the teachers didn't want to help. Many times they just did not have the tools to do it. Right? So there were definitely kids who were like, yes, I get to stay at home. Oh my God, I am happy. And I don't blame them. I mean, every educator those first 2 weeks, we were like, yes, work from home. We loved it. But then there were some, knowing there were kids who were saying, that was my only lifeline. That was my only lifeline to what I needed. So you're right. They came back with so many behaviors. And for a lot of teachers, we just thought, we're not doing something right, right? Like, it's not, something's not working, and part of it's true. But can you talk about some of those behaviors that you guys were seeing? Because for us, I'm going to say just in Georgia, and some of my other colleagues, we were seeing kids who like could not sit still, like not like getting up out of your chair, but like were almost, and this isn't a good, the kids were almost feral. And this is what I mean. There had been no one who was monitoring them. It was almost like they got into school and they were just like this. And we were like, oh my God. And it got me thinking about what happened when they were at home. And a lot of the kids that we talked to were like, no, mom and dad had to work, or mom got sick, or we moved 3 times during COVID, or we got kicked out of our apartment once. They could evict us. Like, it was the stories we were hearing. I was like, oh, this cannot be real. So I'm gonna stop. Like, what kind of behaviors did you guys see?
Ah, what kind? Like, just the very much of like, I'm not showing up anymore. So there were some students like, and still to this day, are unfound students. Like, they were there, but now we've returned, and where are they? Right. So we have students who just behavior was, I'm not showing back up. I'm not going back there. Right. The other behavior, as you said, is like the inattentiveness, right? Like, my attention, you only got my attention for 5 seconds. You only got my attention for 5 minutes. Like, if you can't pull me like an Instagram hook or a TikTok reel, you lost me, right? And then you had students who just didn't have the learning to learn behaviors, because over that time they've missed some very important like transition time. Like, for example, I have a 15-year-old. When the pandemic started, it was her first year of 6th grade. That's a pivotal transition time for her to really learn those specific behaviors needed for secondary altogether, right? Knowing how to switch teachers, knowing how to maintain a planner. So we see students who struggle with executive functioning, and then it looks like I can't express my emotion in a way in which anyone has shown me to cope with this. So now I have explosive behavior. Now you see me eloping out of a building, out of a classroom. Now you see me yelling and screaming, and now you're telling me I'm disrespectful, but this is the only way, because I felt all of this pressure in my body all of this time, and this is the only way I know how to get it out. And it's no offense to you as a teacher on the other end of that. It's just, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know how to deal with it. And so we had students who had emotional outbursts, executive functioning issues, the intentiveness, the I just don't have the behaviors to sit at a desk because I haven't had to in a stint of potentially a year and a half. And now I'm back. So by 8th grade, it's time for her to now start transitioning over into high school. And she has no, like, her executive functioning skills are not what they are supposed to be, because the thought is these are things you should already know, but these are things that I learned from the peers that are around me. And I didn't have peers around me, right? They had a point in time where there were just no peers around them, or when they did come back into a room, because of here they did this like on for so many days with a few students in the classroom, out for so many days in the virtual space, right? And the behaviors in a virtual space are completely different from the behaviors in a physical space. I can be doing so many other things while also listening to a podcast, listening to this lecture with my camera off. And now you want me to show up and be in a physical space.
I hit the wrong button. So there was a comment from Instagram, and she's Arilla David says, "I'm a vet from Chicago. Unfortunately, but true, the whole country came back with the same issues, which lowered the competition from state to state." You hit the nail on the head with that executive functioning. I think right now we're starting to see the damage that technology did just to the regular student, but for our students with disabilities, I feel like it exasperated it. One of my children were also in 6th grade, and she missed half of middle school. She didn't go back that year, and then she missed 7th grade. Her first time in the building was 8th grade, and so that pivotal time she didn't really get. Um, did you notice, like, the kids are coming in, we're seeing this behavior, we're seeing this explosiveness, we're seeing this lack of executive functioning, and then, I mean, and I can only speak for what we've seen, is social media exasperated it, right? So then it became the kids didn't have all these skills. Their parents are working or just not, they're not able to monitor them every minute of the day. And what we saw was the explosiveness, social media mixed in, and it was a disaster. I mean, it was like kids beefing on social media, and we're like, what in the world is happening? Did you guys see that in Las Vegas?
We did. Students didn't know how to deal with each other. Like, I haven't had to deal with you, right? I haven't had to be in a space with you. I can be in a space with you via social media, but my mom, like, the way in which I am using social media, right? It's not a way that it was taught to me. It's a way that, like, oh, I'm seeing these models of it all around. I'm pulling from what I think will get attention, will make me go viral. I'm going to engage this specific way, right? And so now we have the beasts that are happening online trickle into the physical space, and you're like, what happened? Like, I'm confused. Where did this situation occur? And that's when a lot of schools start putting in, like, their acceptable use policy around, like, we need, for example, like at my daughter's high school and a lot of high schools around our state, they have the pouches or they have the boxes where they have them put all the things in there, or they have this software on all of their devices that locks them out of specific sites and things. But we still didn't teach them how to be in community on social media in that space, and it just further exasperated all the other things. Like, this is how I'm dealing with my mental health, this is how I'm dealing with, like, things I'm in conflict with. And it's like, that might not work for you, baby. We got to find what works for you.
I'm glad you said that because, just the simple, like coming back from COVID and us taking for granted what it's like to be in a school with 300, 400, 500, heck, 1,200 or more other kids was basically gone. Cassandra Washington, she's from Chicago. She's saying executive functions not fully developed till around 25. Sometimes as educators, we want students to have the executive functions beyond the age. This is true. One of the things that I think, like, I didn't expect kids to come back and knowing how to take notes and sit down, and I didn't expect that, but I expected for them to come in at least with, after COVID, at least with the hunger of, we're back at school, here's how you learn. And what I quickly realized is, like, that whole, how we learn, how we're supposed to learn, what it looks like, was out the window. There was going to have to be, and I think so. I think that, and then you have the Surgeon General coming out today, or writing the opinion ed piece today, that basically says social media is bad for our kids' mental health, and that's a whole nother webinar, right? It was like, duh, we knew that. Um, when you saw those behaviors, can you talk a little bit about how, just your experience on how schools, educators, communities dealt with it? Because, like you, a lot of our schools went immediately to policy and said, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But did you see any of them starting to kind of like teach around, here's what you do, here's what you don't do?
I've seen limited amount of schools say, you know what, here's a great way to use your technology. From a parent perspective, right? As I said, I have the 15-year-old who's in the house, who her experience with COVID was like secondary, like her first year in middle school. By the time she went back, it was time to start transitioning in the 8th grade, right? I mean, to high school, right? So one of the things we talked about early on, because that also was a time where George Floyd happened and all of these things were happening. And in the space, she was seeing all of the, like, being bombarded with all of these messages. And so, from the perspective of a parent, it was me teaching her, hey, this FYI, let me tell you something. If you're going to post something on your social media, be prepared to back it up. This is where we talked about, like, here's how you use your social media to advocate. Here's how you use your words to advocate, right? There are some educators who do that well, right? Here's how you can really engage your words, your space, anytime you're in a community together, using technology to support you in your advocacy. And there were others who really don't understand that, right? Because there's a wide gap when we talk about the ages of teachers. There are teachers who are like, I'm going to use social media, I'm going to put myself on here, y'all going to see what I'm doing every day in my classroom. And then there's the other ones like, technology is the devil, like, keep that away from me, I don't use that stuff, it's rotting your brain, right? And so you have that large spectrum, and no one is saying, hey, we should have a real conversation on how we can support and leveraging technology to support students, because that is what they're interested in, right? And taking what they're interested in and using it as a tool to support in the education process, versus we're going to put these policies out that says this is a no-go.
Doing this. Somebody said, Twyla, hey Twyla. She said we have to realize that expectations have to be taught, retaught, then taught again. This is true. I want us to remember as adults, these conversations that we have, if we're talking about getting in shape, all because you tell me once how to get in shape doesn't mean I'm going to get in shape. I have to be taught, retaught, taught again. Michelle says keyboard warriors was and still is a real thing. And then they came back to the building with all of that and had to decide if it was just behind a keyboard or not. This is true. This is so true. And people, and I want to link this to what we're talking about with special needs students. This is just a belief that I have. A lot of the things that were caught up, a lot of our students with disabilities were also caught up into these because they did not have the functioning to understand that this is going to get you in trouble. Somebody on Instagram, let me see what they said. They said when students came back, they came with a lack of emotional regulation, self-regulation, anxiety, and extreme behaviors around technology, temper tantrums. I would even say adults.
Adults too.
I would even say adults, emotional regulation, and knowing that the news came out today about social media. I feel like it made it plus one it, right? It just and somebody, Cynthia the counselor, said, now, and guys, and this is true in our area, third, fourth, and fifth graders with serious trauma related issues, vaping in the bathroom, and making TikTok videos in the bathroom.
Yep.
This is, listen, I keep telling people, as a veteran educator, I now sit on a school board, even with my kids, third, fourth, and fifth graders vaping, and people think I'm playing. I'm like, no. They're getting them, and they're vaping, and so what do you say to all of that? It's just so much. And then if you put the layer of special education and the needs and the services of that, it just makes it even more overwhelming.
So this was a big one. When we came back, there was constant conversations across the state around substance abuse, like as a whole, right? Just substance abuse and use as a whole. If you know anything about Las Vegas, Nevada, for us, marijuana is legal, right? So there are also the edibles, the gummies. There have been multiple incidents. And so we would get a lot of, well, what do you put in place for that? What do you do universally for that in our schools? Well, what do we do? And oftentimes the conversation that I end up saying that often comes around is because we have the invisible space of disability, where like depression is not worn on you, anxiety is not worn on you, right? And so a lot of students, going back to that like dysregulation and needing to self-regulate, a lot of them started to engage in the substances, the vaping, the gummies, all of the things to help them mask what was happening, because we told them they need to come back into a space normal, learn traditionally, come back. But we never addressed the trauma that the pandemic held for them, nor did we place anything within our school systems to support in how do I teach you how to regulate, but also how do I as the teacher help regulate you when I may also be dysregulated myself and no one paid attention to that for me. And so it wasn't just the the student, it wasn't just a student issue of being dysregulated, it is also the teacher issue of being dysregulated. And now I'm asked to teach a student who is in dysregulation how to self-regulate.
This is so over on Instagram, guys, we're popping over on Instagram too, Instagram and Facebook. Cynthia, the counselor, says parents are overwhelmed. They're working two or more jobs. They want to resolve their issues at home. Unfortunately, they don't want services because they don't have time to take them to get support. Um, this is true. This is true. And many times, Cynthia, what we're seeing, and Dr. Rutledge, please talk through your vantage point also, is that they feel like, oh, they'll grow out of it. Or it really takes them, because we haven't even talked about the addiction to social media that many of our parents have, and the dysregulation. So when they see it in their children, it is over. I'm going to use the word overwhelming. I don't know if that's it, but are they don't have the time to get them support, and if they do, it's sometimes a money issue, sometimes it's a shame issue, all of those things.
So we gotta be transparent. There is a stigma when it comes to, especially in certain communities. There is a stigma in certain communities and cultures, specifically, and I'll talk from the Black lens of that, right? There is a stigma attached to a disability. There is a stigma attached to whether it's a mental disability or physical disability or a mental disability, right? There is so much stigma attached to those things. And, right, talking about the social economic barriers that come with having to get a diagnosis and or an eligibility, a label, all of those things. So you have multiple barriers conflicting with each other, and you also may be someone who's an adult who is undiagnosed yourself, right? And so we're asking parents to, hey, go get your child eligible. We're going to push your child through eligibility in our school system. You can have an eligibility within the system and not have a diagnosis. You can have a diagnosis and not be eligible for special education services. But we've asked them to go through this process, and then for some of them, it's like putting a mirror. Like, those were things that I displayed when I was a kid. Nothing wrong with me. What do you mean there's something wrong with me? Oh, everybody has a little bit of that. That's not really an issue. And it's not being adequately addressed because we say only a subset population will get these services, only if you they're eligible, only if they have these specific labels.
So I'm glad you said that, because, and guys, we're going to shift to what districts and teachers and parents and students, all of the things that we can do. But I'm glad you said that about, because for my child who is dyslexic, I remember something that a veteran teacher told me that really stuck with me. She was in third grade and I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do. And keep in mind, I'm a teacher. I've taught for 2 decades. And I remember her telling me, she said, what is a diagnosis? What is the difference? She said, what is the diagnosis going to do for you? And I was like, what do you mean? And I was like, get the help she needs. She said, you know what she needs, right? You've told me the behaviors. She said, so talk me through what this diagnosis is going to do. And it was at that moment that I said, you know what? She has a point. These are the areas that I know she needs help in. Here's what I can do immediately while I wait on this diagnosis. Or heck, I cannot get the diagnosis. Like, I can go and do all the things that I'm supposed to do, and they can say, no, she doesn't qualify for an IEP. She doesn't qualify for a 504. And now I'm back at step one. And I think that people don't understand that. So in this discussion about special education after COVID, this is a real issue where we tell parents, go through the progress monitoring cycle, go through this, go through that, and you might not get a diagnosis. And so what happens then?
You don't get a diagnosis. Um, right? You don't get a diagnosis and you're still sitting there going, well, do I get any support? Right? And if you have a teacher who is in the space, or a district who it has invested in universal design for learning, inclusive practices, multi-tier systems and supports, those things should be consistently embedded in the space, and your child is getting access to supports that are needed to meet their needs. But you don't have to have the diagnosis. If your child, someone mentioned it, meets a threshold of that where whatever is happening is making a direct impact on their educational growth, then they receive a substantial amount of support from an additional source. Typically, that person is specialized in whatever area that the child has the eligibility in. But, right, not but, and if we were doing education in an inclusive way and in a supportive way, it wouldn't be that you need just that teacher. We would be collaborating to create a thriving environment where those supports are embedded. Like, oh, your child, we have some students who have dyslexia. What are the dyslexia fonts we need to be utilizing? How do we embed multi-structured instruction? How are we being multi-sensory in our instruction approaches, right? Those conversations are had as we are planning for lessons, for instruction. We have the direct instruction. So we have having schools that are invested in foundational understanding of inclusive practices and how we can universally design our learning environments that are supportive, whether a child is diagnosed and or is eligible, makes all the difference. It doesn't matter. Like at that point, it's like, oh, well, because you get kids, we would get kids, or kids would transition out from my classroom and they'd be like, well, she just did that. It was like, because it was just innate in me. Or like she worked with our general education teacher, and the general education teacher automatically has this, right? But other general education teachers on that campus weren't doing those things. And they're like, but this was just like normal in her classroom, but it's not in the other teacher's classroom.
I'm glad you said that because for the next 20 minutes or so, I want us to talk about well, we're not going to take 10 minutes to talk about the district, but from a district, the framework that a district works in, what can they do from the top level to help? Because the kids are here, the kids are back. Not all of them. We know that we are missing a lot of kids from COVID, but what can the districts do from that large overview? Because we have lots of people on this webinar who are work for a district. There's some superintendents, there's some literacy coordinators, there are some researchers. Like, what can districts do to help pivot to make the classrooms look different? So as you talk about the inclusivity, so it doesn't matter if you have an IEP or a 504 or you're going through the process, you're still getting supports.
I think there has to be intentional investment in designing for those who have consistently been under resourced, underserved within our schools. And that means our students who are Black, our students who are Black with disability, that intersection, right? It means really thinking about how can I design for quote unquote the margins and revamping how we've done things, because how we've done them is not working. We still have our students with disabilities don't graduate at the same rate of pace as individuals without disabilities. They often don't walk they often don't walk out of our schools with diplomas, like the regular traditional diploma, right? And really take an intentional understanding and stance around what special education is. Special education is not a place, it is a service. And we have structurally set up our schools to make it a place. You go to the special education classroom. We've intentionally created, and I get why we've done it. We've done it because we don't know any better, but we've intentionally created these segregated spaces, even amongst, like, because I said it, your general education teacher and your special education teacher. But that's how we know it when both are educators. One just specializes in targeted supports, interventions, how to ensure students have access through different modes and methods, right? Different approaches. And so we have to be really intentional with our resources provide specific trainings around how do I curate classroom environments that are supportive. Doesn't matter who's in the classroom. How do I ensure that it is developmentally appropriate, contextually appropriate, and culturally appropriate? And having a really intensive stance on how do we define that as a district? Because right now, each school is defining that on their own, through their own terms, through their own lens of whatever policy that we put forth. And understanding that special education was a service, right? It is not a place. It is a service that is meant to increase independence, ensure there is access to vocational and or higher education. It is not to be like you stuck here and this is the only place for you because we don't know what to do with you. And that's really what it was. We just like when we did Brown versus the Board of Education and everything was we have to now desegregate our schools. We did the same thing with students with learners with disabilities. We said we're going to put them in there and we weren't intentional about teaching to how do we do this. We just said we're going to put you in.
And that is so important because that the intentionality should follow the money. The money should follow the intentionality. So lots of districts got lots of COVID relief money. That money has to be spent. So inclusivity might look like, and please add on, it might look like instead of one teacher in front of a class, there's two. Or your support teacher is certified in math or ELA or science and social studies to really effectively pull small groups. It might look like, what else might it look like? I'm sorry.
You're fine. It might look like the special education teacher who has the expertise in whatever area. If I'm one of the special education teachers, I have a really, really, really amazing understanding of language and literacy, and I am coaching other teachers on interventions around language and literacy in their classroom so that they can pull small groups and teach students who need that targeted instruction or they need that more intensive instruction. You have others who have a really good grasp on understanding how to use the data, right, to move the instruction. So it means that we work together. We don't work in silos, and we've been working in silos for a very long time. Because you're a special education teacher, you deal with all of that over there. They your kids. I'm just here.
Yep.
It looks like, yes, we might be co-teaching, and it doesn't mean like we co-teaching and I'm your para in the classroom. We co-teaching. What part of this lesson are we going to take? Here's how we can embed these specific approaches and strategies into the lesson. Here's how we can make these standards really targeted, chunk them out, including some multisensory processes and approaches into this lesson. Not, oh yeah, you do that group over there, I'ma do this group over here. We ain't got time to plan together, which we should be really intentional about having them plan together.
Yeah.
I had to write a grant for that to happen. I
Yeah.
had to be like, no, this is not gonna work. Like, I have tons of students who are coming in and out, and we don't even have time to like have a conversation about what data is showing up. How can we drive the instruction? How do you like, here are some things you can put in the instruction, in the overall instruction lesson to support not just the students in the classroom with disabilities, but everyone. We didn't even have time for that. I had to like create a whole grant for that to happen.
Yeah.
And you have, like you said, that investment goes a long way. If you are investing to ensure that inclusivity is happening, we are in this space where we are collaborating together in our POCs or our community of practices and learning from each other. Those I don't even want to say those best practices, but those practices that really work contextually for the group of students that we support, it makes all the difference.
I love that. And I think we've switched into schools. And somebody said this on Instagram. Cynthia, the counselor, said they need to come into the school and model the support and strategies and provide resources. I agree on that. I agree on, definitely the money, definitely the staff, definitely, but also giving people time to practice, giving people time to to plan together, giving people time to meet with parents, giving time, like buying more time. Um, Twyla says all students benefit from co-teaching strategies that are universal in nature.
Mhm.
And she also says effective PLCs are key as well. That's really important. Now, let's get to teachers are watching this, and if you're in the South, you're already on summer vacation. But if you're in other parts of the country, you are still in school for at least another week or so. What are some of the things as teachers plan for this upcoming year? What can they do to help at what they can control? Because you can't control the whole school. You're the teacher. I'm in my classroom. What else can they do?
Connect with others. I think I learned, not even I think, I know I learned the most when I was able to be in a community of other teachers, especially in areas that I was like, I don't know about this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
being in that space with them and being able to ask the questions, right, are supportive in nature. You learn when you're in community with people. Pick up a book if you're like if you're one of those people who is like, I need the book in front of me, I need to open up the book, I need to be able to touch it, highlight it. Invest in your own professional development and professional growth. And that's also like, and I say that knowing, right,
Yeah.
that we ain't got us, we don't want to spend our all of our good earned coin on uh the PD. And I
Yeah.
get it, right?
Yeah.
And also figuring out like ways to learn how to advocate for your own PD plan.
Yeah.
Um, Using I see Michelle mentioned like the SPED law books, using the SPED law, like, hey, you should be investing in me because the law says that we are
Mm,
required to support based on
mhm.
IDEA, right? Being able to turn around and be like, hey, listen, like, I feel like there's a gap here.
Yeah.
Uh, Finding community, as I said, and then really thinking about what is one or two strategies. You ain't got to implement all of those strategies, but what are one or two strategies you're like, this is my plan, this is how I'm going to implement these two, and asking for feedback around them, like, hey, I have a community within my app called Coach in the Pocket. And so one of the things that we consistently do in that space is like people drop questions into the space. They ask each other like, hey, anybody know anything about how to use I had one teacher asked about teaching strategies go. They're in a preschool program. I had one teacher ask about they're going through the letters training, right? And they're a teacher of the deaf, and they're like, hey, was anybody forced to use this with students who are deaf or hard of hearing? Like, how, if you were, like, hey, what are some strategies? Or could some, like, has anybody ever like unpacked it to see like what strategies are beneficial? Ask the questions. Um, don't be afraid to be open to learning.
I love that idea because definitely holding school as a teacher, being very clear about the training that you want and being very clear about how to get it. And sometimes, we've been in schools where no one can go anywhere, but there are always these. What I have found, and this is a tidbit for those watching who are saying, I can't go anywhere from my school district. If you reach out to some of these conferences and say, hey, I teach this population, we don't have any money, what can you do? Many times they'll let you come on a pass, but you have to reach out to them in enough time. And I like what you said about we shouldn't have to spend our own money. And Michelle is right. The SPED laws are on the book, the strategies are on paper, but the implementation and accountability is lacking. And that might be a follow up that we do around this because that implementation and accountability, I feel like, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that everybody is scared. Like people sometimes don't even know what the law says, but when they do, they're nervous about letting people know what they don't know and what they need to do. Is that what I'm thinking?
Yeah, it's a big thing when you're like, so the law says what? Because each state, for those of you who may not know, right, each state interprets what the federal government has said for their state. And then if, like, for example, in Nevada, for us, each district is locally in charge of themselves. So they then take whatever the state has taken, and decipher it from federal law, decipher it for each of their districts, and then we have our schools who are also have autonomy, so then they take it and they might even interpret it in alignment with what the district says, right? And so for some of us, like I worked in a specific district for a very long time, those specific, the way in which they unpack that law was very much so ingrained in how I perceived what the law was. And then you go back and you're like, actually, IDEA is very vague with this. This is what IDEA says, but this is how they unpacked it, because each district wants to make sure, right? They not going through no due process. They ain't got no lawsuits. They not gonna be sued later, which, let's be real, it still happens, because there was a lawsuit that happened in collaboration with ADA, which you have to also have an understanding of as a district. But because like that student had graduated out, the family kept all the records, they won a case using ADA case law, not just IDEA case law, after the student had quote unquote graduated from their program, their school district. um and so we have to be really, really, the word is just strategic and intentional about how we move.
Just like, Ty said, these are students, and the labeling and we know when some of them are not getting resources and getting what they need, and how do we build a system that is inclusive to all. So regardless if you meet the threshold, you still get what you need. um School is out for some, school's about to end for others. Let's pivot really quickly into back to school. What do you, as somebody who is deeply rooted in services for students with disabilities, what is your advice for those that it keeps you up late at night for what kids get and do not get?
Ironically, it comes to what Ty is talking about. Just because I have quote unquote a disability, a label, something that makes me eligible, shouldn't automatically align me to only that. Um, Oftentimes I have to have really in-depth conversations with our schools who utilize multi-tier systems of support, because the assumption is that, well, they already have an IEP. They don't need the rest of this. And I have to constantly have the conversation. No, they are supposed to get all of this in addition to the services and supports that are in their IEP. Um, and that's what keeps me up, is that we automatically, when they are assigned this label, we automatically have this stigma or these preconceived notions over what they can do and what they can't do. Most of the time, it's a lot around what they can't do versus thinking about what they can do. Um, And if you know anything about, like, I am the advocate of all things brilliance and coming from an asset-based mindset of like, what is it that you're interested in? What it is it that you like? Who do I need to collect? Who do I, as the educator, need to collaborate with, connect with, to be able to support you to leverage what your interests are in this space? How can I uplift your assets and not look at you as another number, another disability label, but who are you as a whole human individual? Because at the end of the day, it's all about humanity centered spaces for me. It is never about like, this is special education and this is the special education space and this is how you do the special education stuff. It's about how do I help you as a whole human develop, and what are the supports you need to be that whole human.
And I love that, because when we talk rethinking supports, I love the way you've humanized this conversation. And because so many times it becomes a compliance. We're just doing it so we don't get in trouble. We're just doing it so we don't get in trouble. And you're really talking about disrupting the system and changing how we look at students. And Patricia says it in there. She says, I use learning specialists, especially when we're supporting a particular subject matter. I support math. I love that because it's rethinking what we've usually done and saying, how do we put students at the center of it? Um, I know you're 3 hours behind in Las Vegas, but do you have 2 more minutes? Just 2 more minutes.
um as you move forward and thinking about like how are you going to learn, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email is hello@FeliciaLRutledgeConsulting.com. You can reach out to me that way. You can follow me on Instagram, which is Felicia L. Rutledge. You can find me on the formerly known Twitter, but it is X as FL Rutledge. You can find me on LinkedIn. Everything is my name because there is power in a name. And so I'll leave you with, if we're talking about there is power in a name, it is power in asking our learners how they'd like to be identified versus taking those labels, those eligibilities, and saying, this is who you are. We ask them who they are. I've had the opportunity to work with many individuals across the state, across the nation, who are very big disability advocates. And when you ask them, how would you like to be addressed? They will tell you by their name. So if I leave you with anything, ask them.
As we think about this, and guys, this Do the Work series is all about us bringing researchers and practitioners together to talk about real solutions to what this looks like. We will have more conversations in July, August, September, October. In July, we're going to focus on the U.S. Surgeon General's, social media and how it's affecting our kids. And Dr. Rutledge, we might call you back to be on that. It'll be a panel. But these are real conversations, and it's really important for us as we put people in front of you guys, for you guys to be able to reach out to them. Please follow her. We put her email in the chat for you guys to see. But this is the start. I love the way we really should have named this dismantling supports in post COVID classrooms for students with disabilities. But I love this. Guys, we thank you. If you want a replay of this, you can always go to our YouTube, but I also put the link in here for the replay for you guys to get. Dr. Rutledge, anything else you want to say? Anything? You know what? Hold on. We have one game. This always gets people. Okay. Tell us, if you could change one thing, you had a wand. I kind of know what you're going to say, but if you had a wand for anything in education to change it for the better, and that wand gave you unlimited resources, money, people, nothing was an object, what would be the one thing that you would change? And you got to be specific.
Oh, I got to be specific. Liberate SPED with joy and humanity. Ensure that we are always centering humanity and joy in everything that we do.
And that looks like all the things.
That looks like asking them who they are. What is the support you need? What are you interested in? And asking ourselves, who do I need to connect with? Who do I need to collaborate with? Who can I co-create with? Right? It is not, you are not solo dolo. And if I could do the magic wand, you'd have your time and resources to be able to connect, collaborate, and co-create for the humanity of the learners that we serve. So that is really us liberating SPED.
I love it. Dr. Rutledge, so she has a lot. First off, she writes for the Educators Room, so she's brilliant. But I'm not gonna say anything, but guys, she is a wealth of knowledge, and we will be seeing more of her in the future. So y'all follow her on all platforms. We love this. We love y'all. Thank you.